Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Academy, brought to you by the Plan B Network and Bitbox. This is the second course on my second book, Bitcoin Independence Reimagined from 2020. I'm Knut and I'm here as always with Luke the Wolf. Good morning, Luke.
Good morning, Knut. I'm doing great and excited for this one. The Tale of Two Richards, Richard Simmons and who's the Richard the Lionheart, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Perfect.
The title, The Tale of Two Dicks, was a bit too much on the nose, so it had to be Two Richards.
Right. I think Two Richards is fine. Before we dive in, I think just a reminder, if you want to get involved with the Academy, the best way you can do that is to check out our Geyser page, geyser.fund/project/infinity. All the details are there. You can join the Academy, follow along with our whole course, join our chat group, watch the live episodes if you like. So it's a lot of fun. Join us. Anything else, Knut, before we get started?
Not really. I think we can get started. Just let's dive in.
All right, let's do it. A Tale of Two Richards. In the 1680s, on the Emerald Isle of Ireland, a boy named Richard Cantillon was born. He grew up to be a successful merchant and banker and wrote books on economics and monetary theory. He's best known for noticing the economic phenomenon named after him, the Cantillon effect, which describes the asymmetric economic effects of inflation. In a fractional reserve banking system, the financial system that the majority of the Earth's nation-states currently operate under, new money is created out of thin air when a bank decides to grant a business owner a loan. At a specified date in the future, this loan will have to be paid back to the bank with interest. The amount of money needed to make up for this interest is never in circulation at any specific point in time. Therefore, there is a constant need for new loans to be granted. In other words, a need for new money is always present in the system. What Cantillon noticed, way ahead of his time, is that the closer a person is to the money being issued, the less of a negative impact the inevitable inflation following the newly expanded total money supply will have on that person. Inflation will, therefore, always benefit those responsible for the money printing and their friends first. This effect is not limited to money, but applies to anything with an increasing supply. There's inherent inertia in the price discovery mechanisms of all markets. The effects an increased supply of a good will have on its price are not felt directly, but gradually, as the relationship between supply and demand is altered. If you can produce more of something at a lower cost than your competitors, you reap the benefit of charging a higher price before the market discovers that there's an oversupply of that something. Okay, very good introduction to the Cantillon effect. A super important concept, I think, to understand.
Yeah, it's the root of all evil. Some people have money printers and they can use them legally and print more money. It's like we talk about this a lot, but this is the problem. And as Cantillon observed, the closer you are to the monetary spigot, the more you benefit from the criminal side effects of printing money. So this is why, and since there always needs to be more and more loans, this is an important point. There is never enough money in circulation. There always has to be more and more and more to pay off the increasing debt. That's why all national debts go up and never down. And you've seen the national debt tracker for the US, right? It ticks with thousands and thousands of dollars per microsecond. It's just insane how much debt they're in and how much it grows. It grows exponentially over time, which means that politicians and central and bankers get more and more powerful over time. And we have to do what they say because they're in charge of everything. And they get more power and more money the more time that passes in the fiat system. And it explains everything. Have you seen that chart of how many banks there are in America? Like how many banks there really are? And it's like 3 of them left. And they're probably owned by BlackRock, all 3 of them anyway. But like 100 years ago, there were hundreds of banks and they've all monopolized into this one thing. And that is the Cantillon effect. That's what it does. It removes all the competition because it gives some players a very unfair advantage. So it's much harder for the smaller competitors to get into the market. The bureaucracy is expanding to meet the needs of the expanding bureaucracy, as they say.
Yeah, and I think when I say this is a super important concept to understand, from my perspective, it's just this is a super important concept to understand to understand Bitcoin, like to understand why Bitcoin is the thing. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I think we'll dig into it a little later, but like the thing here is how money printing actually happens. That's something that people don't understand. I think it's not literally the mint of some country just printing the paper bills and they go out into circulation magically. It's the loan mechanism, and it's the loan mechanism even starts with the central bank giving out loans to the other banks. Like that's what the interest rate setting. That's where it starts. That's why the Federal Reserve rate makes a difference, because the other banks can loan money from the central bank for that rate, and then everything else cascades from that, right? And that's the Cantillon effect again and again and again and again and again. So it goes down in the retail level, but it all starts with like the central banks too.
Yeah, maybe I think cause and effect is both ways here, because also the central bank comes in beforehand, but also after, when there's a supposed bank run, when a bank is running out of business because they have no money left, they get bailed out by the government, which is sort of the central bank. And there's like a couple of different ways in which new money comes into circulation. The biggest one is just personal or business loans, like loans in the private sector. Someone taking out a loan and the bank conjuring up money out of thin air. The other one is quantitative easing, and this is a big one, in which the government, first and foremost, this is for the US. All the money is in the US anyway. So what happens is that the government gives the Federal Reserve government bonds in exchange for newly printed dollars that have to be paid back by interest, but can never be paid back by interest because there's not enough money in circulation. And the funniest thing about that is, if you think about what a government bond is, it becomes even more devious. Because a government bond is a promise from the government to steal even more from you and your children in the future than they're doing right now. It's like a bet on the government being even more powerful in the future. So they get the privilege of diluting the value of your money in exchange for a promise to be even more assholey to you in the future. And I think this is just awful. And I think there is actually just straight up money printing that also goes on in some crappy countries, I'm sure. And fake dollars and stuff. I mean, the government isn't the only institution that counterfeits money. There are private counterfeiters too. I heard 10 years ago, I think it was the third biggest export of Colombia was fake dollars after coffee and cocaine. So, yeah, hell of a trio of export goods. But all in all, what you said about Bitcoin, like Bitcoin is literally the antidote to this, because it's the only known currency where no one can print more, that no one can print more of. Like crypto, anyone can print money. Fiat, only certain people can print money, and Bitcoin, no one can print money. That's the difference between the three.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing here is one of the problems is inflation itself. Like, why does inflation need to happen? And I can suspend disbelief for long enough to say that there's a less unintelligent approach. You can come up with a slightly nuanced and intelligent argument for why you need inflation. I think it's wrong. I think we all here listening think it's wrong, but something about you want people to move money around, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But the mechanism of the inflation done this way is just it's just a centralizing mechanism. So both the inflation itself is a problem, diluting the money supply for everyone, but then the mechanism that the money supply is diluted is also centralizing. Like those closest to the money spigot get the benefits. So
yeah,
it's a double problem. Yep.
It's funneling wealth from the lower and the middle classes into the hands of the super wealthy.
It'd be great if people caught on to this. Should we read the next paragraph and continue?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. One example where the Cantillon effect can be observed in a commodity other than money is in the value of something as odd as autographed restaurant bills. Sometime in the mid-20th century, the by then world-famous painter Salvador Dali allegedly signed the wreckage of a car he had crashed into in France, instantly making it more valuable than it was before the crash. He had by then made such a name for himself that putting his signature on stuff instantly increased the value of whatever thing he chose to honor with his autograph. He was not the only famous painter who did this, though. Several others had figured out that they could pay their restaurant bills by simply signing them. By this act, they magically transformed small pieces of paper into art. These autograph bills were then traded among the restaurant's staff and elsewhere. At first, they could be traded at very high prices, but as the practice became more common, their value naturally diminished. In other words, they became inflationary and therefore decreased in value. The closer you lived to a celebrity painter, the more aware you were of how happy they were putting their names on practically anything, and thus, the more aware you became of how abundant these signed bills really were. In knowing more about the supply of this good, you could also predict that they would lose value eventually. Not at all unlike how a pyramid scheme works. This is exactly what Cantillon observed. Anything that can be marketed as more scarce than it actually is can be sold at a higher price as long as market participants haven't yet noticed its abundance. This always benefits you more the closer you are to the source. Okay, so more on Cantillon effect.
I think I absolutely love this example because it's the perfect example of the Cantillon effect in effect. it's absolutely great that. And if you think about art, like art is being used as a store of value, or as I prefer, a medium of change over time these days, alongside real estate and Apple stock and stuff. And art is a consumer good. It's denominated in something as scarce as art. It should drop in price over time. Even the Mona Lisa should drop in price over time, denominated in sats. It's just absurd to me that something goes up in value, and the only reason it does is because someone is allowed to print money. You can print money, but you can't print Mona Lisas. That's why art goes up in value. So, and this signing bills thing, it just points to the absurdity of the whole thing with art. Yeah, of course, if a painting is nice to look at, and you want it in your house because you want the ability to look at a nice painting every time you walk past it, then of course it's valuable to you. There's nothing wrong with, like, art should have value. It's just that the ridiculousness of especially modern art, where the how famous the piece is more important than if it's actually nice to look at. And you get these duct tape banana things that are actually there to launder money more than anything else. And I want to get back to the roof of the Sistine Chapel instead of duct tape bananas. And I think we do that through Bitcoin. By the way, I wrote an article for Bitcoin Art Magazine, which is a new Bitcoin, a new magazine about Bitcoin coming out soon. The first issue, I think, is bitcoinartmagazine.com. I can't swear it is, but I think that's the address. And it looks really neat. It's over 100 pages in flying colors and interviews with a whole bunch of artists. Fractal Encrypt's full node statue is on the cover. So make sure to check that out.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with the whole thing with art and all this is like, it's one of those things that people just put money into because there isn't some other place to do it, right? Like in real estate and stocks to a certain extent, right? It's because there is nowhere to put this money eventually. You stop being able to pay for stuff that you don't need or want. It's much more efficient to put it into Salvador Mundi, and then you have a thing that has $100 million worth for, Saudi Prince X, right? And yeah, I think that's another thing that Bitcoin is going to fix. How its art is going to only be purchased if it's considered good. Now, it's still going to be subjective. You can like modern art. I'll think maybe your mother took too much Tylenol if you did that. But yeah, it's but you're allowed to like dumb things, I guess. but you have to pay for them. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, some dumb art is fun.
I guess we'll leave it at that.
Maybe I'll go tape a banana to my wall just for the sake of, just for fun.
Feel free. Good luck getting anyone to pay for it.
Yeah, I'll upgrade it. I'll use Gorilla Tape instead of just regular duct tape and like, yeah, or gaff tape, whatever it was.
Yeah, there you go. Good stuff. All right, let's continue and maybe meet the other Richard. Neither of these is Richard Simmons or Richard the Lionheart, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately not.
In 1971, a more famous Richard did something to the world economy that all of his predecessors had resisted the temptation of doing. He suspended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold. This man's full name was Richard Milhous Nixon, and he was the 37th President of the United States of America. The US dollar had, until then, been redeemable for gold at a fixed price of $35 per ounce. This price had been the true intersubjective value of $1 American since 1944, when representatives from 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to sign an agreement that effectively turned the US dollar into the world's reserve currency. After the Bretton Woods Agreement, every other currency could be converted into dollars at an almost entirely fixed rate. And a dollar was considered as good as gold by most of the other participating states. It turned out that it wasn't nearly as good as gold, though, as inflation ramped up in the US during the early 70s. Milton Friedman described the inflationary process and laid blame on the printing presses of the Federal Reserve in his 1980 TV series, Free to Choose. The reason we have inflation in the United States, or for that matter anywhere in the world, is because these pieces of paper and their accompanying book entry for their counterparts in other nations are growing more rapidly than the quantity of goods and services produced. The truth is, inflation is made in one place and one place only, here in Washington. I'll pause here for comment. Inflation, 1971.
Yeah, I mean, truth be told, inflation started before Nixon, and he sort of had to do that. One of the presidents sort of had to do this or go back to harder standard. I mean, in Nixon's case, it was partially to fund the war in Vietnam, but as I said, they had already started printing more dollars than they had gold in their vaults. It's fractional reserve banking on a national level. That was already in place, and the reason that they had to disband the convertibility is exactly that it didn't have enough gold to give out when people wanted their gold back. So ever since 1971, we've been living in this like there should have been pitchforks and torches back in 71. Like, we're living in the era of fake money. The world's reserve currency is counterfeited every second. Just think about that. Like, think about what that means and what kind of a world, like how much better the world could have been if we didn't have that. I mean, we live in quite a nice world anyway, and all of that is because of the free market and how lovely it is when people get to, do favors for one another in exchange for other favors. So despite this insane counterfeiting, we're living in quite a peaceful world that is beautiful and quite easy for at least us here in developed countries to thrive in. But it could have been so much better. It's the things that the unseen things Frederick Bastiat talked about, like we never see how much better the roads could have been if they were ordered by people who actually wanted them. And we don't know how much better the world would have been without this insane money printing. And by the way, this quote is from this TV series Free to Choose. I can highly recommend that. I mean, Friedman is not a total Austrian. He's not an Austrian economist. He's of the Chicago school, so I don't agree with him on everything. But he's done some good stuff. And there's another series called Free to Choose 30 Years Later or something like that by a Swedish economist called Johan Norberg, which is also worth checking out, where he revisits all the places that Friedman goes to in this 1980s TV series in 2010 or something, and he sees, or maybe it's 25 years later, I don't remember the title of the thing, but that's also worth a watch. And I love this quote, like inflation comes from the central bank. That's it. It's counterfeiting.
No, that's great. And again, back to kind of our talk about inflation is that yeah, there's just no excuses for it. Again, with the macroeconomists, the Keynesians, thinking that you need inflation for the economy to work, and it's just you don't. The 2% inflation target that these Keynesians have matches the inflation rate of gold. In other words, they were basically just saying that okay, the way of the world that was already mandated by the supply of gold, the stock to flow of gold, that's fine. And if people had been able to keep to that, I think we would have actually done pretty okay if we had been able to stick to just gold. Like it's slow enough of an inflation rate that it's not really that bad, but the true inflation rate is just ridiculously worse. And now we have to put the cap on the bottle and enforce a no inflation rate policy by force of our individual choices. That's it.
Yeah, but on the gold standard, inflation measured in gold, which it was measured in back then, was zero. Like exactly zero if you measure inflation through gold, because it was directly convertible to gold. So the 2% is like it's like on top of whatever inflation gold had. So even there, it's like more insidious than you think. And when you really think about it, that all prices should fall, then you start realizing how much you've been lied to.
Yeah. Ridiculous. Let's continue the discussion about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve had been doing what banks always do. It had been giving out way more receipts for gold, dollar bills, than they could pay for with the gold they actually had in their vaults. When foreign banks became suspicious and wanted to reclaim their gold, President Nixon simply changed the rules and made this impossible. By the time he did, the dollar was already established as the world's reserve currency, and there was nothing the other countries could do to change this. An ounce of gold is right now in December 2019 worth $1,464 US. In other words, a dollar's worth of gold today would be redeemable for less than 2.5 cents back in 1971. Banknotes and coins are rare these days, though, and most of the money in the world exists solely in digital form. Today, money in digital form is easier to conjure up out of thin air than banknotes were in the 70s. The superpowers of the world tirelessly try to outdo one another in this department, now more than ever. Negative interest rates are a testament to this, and the predictions of the eldest of the two Richards described in this chapter continuously prove true as American and Chinese megacorporations take over the world at an ever-increasing rate. Yeah, so as mentioned, the taking America off the gold redeemability has caused quite many problems in the world. What the fuck happened in 1971?
Yeah, exactly. Check out that website, WTFhappenedin1971.com. There's some clear indicators of what went wrong and when. So many things. So go check that out.
Yeah. It would be nice if normies picked up on that too. There's all this talk of, well, this is the evil of capitalism, this is the evil of right-wing governments, trickle-down economics, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, it's just the inflation, guys.
It isn't capitalism. It's crony capitalism at best. But I'd call it communism. It's central planning. There's a central institution that plans the economy by printing more money. So like I there's nothing right wing about it in my mind. Like in my mind, the political scale is a scale from 0 to 100%, and it goes from right to left. And the 0 point is no politics, and all the other politics are left wing politics because they are all based on theft and expropriation of other people's property. So yeah.
Well, the people who are blaming the so-called capitalism, though, are further to the left. They're blaming policies that are closer towards that 0 point. They think reducing government and less intervention and blah 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 is the cause of all the problems, and they think the solution is more government, more communism. I don't think that's going to work out very well.
Nope, it never does it?
I don't believe so. Now I think we can get onto the Bitcoin of it, shall we?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Some say that Bitcoin is too experimental and unreliable. Who are we to blame if no one's in charge? Well, we're living in the time of the greatest unreliable monetary experiment ever conducted, and the person to blame is Richard Nixon. It's that simple. If you look at the statistics, much has changed since 1971. Between 1971 and 2017, the average productivity per hour of labor in the United States grew by 246%, while the compensation for those hours grew by only 115% during the same period. Wealth has been funneled into the pockets of the top 1% and out of the pockets of everyone else at an ever-increasing rate since Nixon's scheme began. National debts have risen, housing costs have risen. Everyone's indebted, it seems. We all live in houses built by our parents and grandparents, but we still owe vast amounts of money to some bank for some reason. Most people just accept the way things are and think that there's nothing to do about it. But it is not the way the world is supposed to work. We've all been robbed, and we're still being robbed right now. The only way to stop the thievery is to quickly acquire something that is hard to confiscate and will hold its intersubjective value for a long time. Yeah, I'll pause there. Any more thoughts along this line? Bitcoin is the antidote, yes?
Yeah, Bitcoin is hardly even mentioned in this paragraph, but it clearly alludes to it. Yeah, more of the same. I think those statistics are actually from that website from WTF, happened in 1971.com, and I can't recommend checking that out enough. Paints a very clear picture of what happened in 1971. I'd say if I wrote this chapter today, I wouldn't blame Richard Nixon personally as much, because I think he was forced to do something like this. Everyone is governed by their incentives, and sometimes the incentive's just too strong and you have to do something. And so the system itself and the preceding counterfeiting before 1971 is sort of what triggered that thing. And also the horrid war. I mean, I'd be more or equally pissed at Nixon for the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think that's the bigger thing to lay on his shoulders. Although he didn't start the damn thing. That's the another point there. Nixon kind of gets the blame for the worst parts of the Vietnam War, and there's this Anthony Bourdain quote, like, you can't go to Cambodia without wanting to strangle Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands or something like this. And I never actually really totally understood that, because they were only in power for like 3 years of the Vietnam War. But I guess a lot of like the really bad stuff happened during those 2-3 years, something like that.
Yeah, and they prolonged it to win the next election, right?
Right, something like that.
And there's also this character called Robert McNamara. There's a great documentary about him. It's like a shadowy figure in all of these American wars, just brutally corrupt, all of it, and fucking awful. Then again, I mean, the Vietnam War is bad enough, but I think a lot of the wars after the Vietnam War is because of this money printing scheme. Like, they've been able to print more weapons after 1971. The world is more unstable because of it. So like, I don't know what's the bigger crime. Probably in the long run, the removing the convertibility of the dollar to gold is worse than even the Vietnam War, horrid as it was.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that, because again, as you say, I think it was just forced. The bad behavior was already happening, and I think the wars themselves are the like they ran out of ways to finance the wars, and so they did the money, and so they did the counterfeiting, and then the 71 was just a after effect. I think that's probably pretty true.
It's all part of the same problem, that the possibility to print money exists in the first place, and that's what Bitcoin solves.
Yeah. Let's continue. All of the economic theories that rely on a constant inflation of the money supply have one thing in common: they're immoral. Whether they work or not isn't the point. If your theory needs to rely on thievery in order to get people to behave in certain ways, it is wrong. Period. A society that relies on the constant robbery of its subjects in its base layer is bound to be corrupted over time. How can anyone trust anyone else if pricing mechanisms are broken? Prices are information. And more than that, they're supposed to incentivize people to make sound, informed financial decisions so that resources aren't misallocated or wasted. As long as the world's currencies are inflationary, we can forget about equality, fairness, or environmentalism. Should I continue?
No, I have a couple of points here that I want to make, and this is this is such an underappreciated point, and Mises was the first one who made it. That the problem with socialism and communism is not an incentive problem. It is a price mechanism problem. And even today, I see people like Konstantin Kissin, for instance, explain what he thought was wrong with the Soviet Union, and he misses this point, which I think is the biggest point and the most destructive point. Like, if you have a gun to your head and the government tells you to work, you will work. Like, it's not a I won't work because everyone makes equal. Every single job pays equally anyway, so there's no incentive for me to work. Yeah, there is. If you have a gun to your head, there is an incentive for you to work and to work hard. But if there aren't prices, the correct pricing signals in society, then none of the factories and none of the people know what to do and when. So you're removing the language of value creation. And that's what impoverishes everyone in the long run. And it's such an underrated effect. And there's a great Mises essay from from way before he wrote Human Action. I think it's called just Socialism, a book called Socialism. But I think he wrote an essay before that on this as well. I don't remember this stuff, but you can find it all at the Mises Institute. Mises about socialism and the price signals. That's where the crux of the problem lies.
Yeah, and it just speaks to how the problems here are just so deep and, as you say, insidious. And I mean, this directly addresses the sort of devil's advocate straw man I was putting up. Like, even if there's supposed to be like a 2% inflation target, it's just immoral because it just takes away from people. And I mean, the counter arguments that you get are, how are governments supposed to be able to do stuff? How are governments supposed to be able to defend themselves? Blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, well, yeah, that's the point. They don't get to. They don't get to without consent. They don't get to do stuff that isn't good. Even if we don't take this all the way to anarcho-capitalist utopia paradise land, anarcho-capistan, Hancapistan. Like, if a government is smaller and constrained by what its citizens consent for it, that's just better. And if people have a way to opt out of inflation, that's just better too. Like, maybe we'll live in a world where US dollars and all the national currencies will still exist. But if you can just put most of your money into Bitcoin and wait out the inflation and only use dollars and euros and etc. when it suits you, when you need to buy stuff, that's already a massive improvement. I wonder how long it's going to take for the effects of Bitcoin adoption to become visible. It's slow, but gradually, but suddenly. So we all say, right?
Yeah, but it is visible for within our sphere. Like, we're living it. We're seeing prices drop over time, and it's beautiful. So I, as you know, I prefer to view libertarianism and Ancapistan as a lens to view the world through, rather than an actual political stance. It's more like calling an apple and calling theft. All inflation is theft. Someone is stealing. All taxes are theft. And I like how Hans Hermann Hoppe put it, by the way. On the free market, we compete to provide the most powerful goods possible. And governments compete too in providing the most powerful bads possible. Like wars, for instance. That's just government competition between governments. And it's all in bads, not in goods. So I think that's a great way of seeing it. And defunding them is the only way. That's the only thing the left gets right. Defund the police. Yes, please. Defund all of it. Like all the other institutions too, please. Yes.
Sounds good. Let's continue. A corrupt system simply won't reward honesty. Without a moral foundation, every other socioeconomic issue becomes a mere charade. Mainstream media news outlets constantly focus on trivialities and make us forget the mass theft that created the power asymmetries in the first place. Have you ever asked yourself why TV scheduling is referred to as programming? No one in charge of money issuance has ever been able to resist the urge to enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else. The only way to protect yourself from the greed of the central bankers is to opt out. Ask yourself what ownership really is and which, if any, of your possessions are truly yours. Which of them can't be taken away from you because of a political decision or a banking crisis? Do you even have any items that fit these criteria? The realization that every economy on Earth is a pyramid scheme can be very depressing. It forces you to think about how destructive your own behavior can be to those at the bottom of the pyramid. When you notice how unfair the whole system is, it's easy to become cynical and suspicious of everyone. Try to focus on what works instead and beware of conspiracy theories. Our cognitive biases skew our perceptions, and because of this, the don't trust, verify approach is always the correct way of tackling a problem. Don't guess. Look it up. All of it. All right. Interesting conclusion.
Yeah. A shout out to Daniel Prince here to begin with for the programming sentence. Yeah, he came up with that, and I think it's great. He also came up with a sentence in one of the other books, or maybe it's in this one too. What was that? Like, if you're a straight A student, you excelled at being average.
I think the programming thing is a coincidence. It was a different usage of the word previously, but still,
yes, of course, it's just a pun. But I like puns, as you know. Dad jokes. I mean, do your own research to whatever extent you can. Then, of course, you have to trust authority for some things. It's just there's a great TED talk about a guy trying to construct a toaster from scratch, like digging for iron ore and, refining steel and making copper wire and like trying to make a toaster from scratch. And it doesn't work because it requires the free market. It requires pricing mechanisms. But so we have to trust the experts to a certain extent. I mean, you don't know every hardware component of your computer and how it works. Like, no one does. Like, no one can build stuff. The free market provides us with everything. And there's nothing wrong with expertise and the division of labor. But if you can look stuff up, do your homework. That's what Don't Trust, Verify is all about. So it's just a battle cry for that, I guess, ending the chapter here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, do your homework when it matters. I think there's a certain amount where you can offload the thinking capacity to others and all this, but be careful about who you trust and be able to verify when you can. I think that's the important part. And with Bitcoin, the great thing is that it's just as easy as running a node. So that's the good part.
Yeah, but for instance, in this core versus not debate, who to trust, and this is definitely an area where you should do your homework, and not only the computer science part of it, but the economics side of it. And I think we're in a situation where one camp gets one right and the other camp gets the other right to some degree. And we want the Bitcoin developers to be in the middle of the Venn diagram. But it seems like they're only in one circle at the moment, and it seems like the plebs are in the other circle. So how do we find the people that are in both? And that can be tricky, and it can be tricky who to trust in Bitcoin because there are so many shitcoiner incentives. People who have a history of shitcoining and doing semi-scammy stuff, they still have very strong opinions on where Bitcoin should go in the future, what should and what should not be done, what can be done, and like. There's a big difference between what you can do and what you should do. And people focus too much on what you can and too little on what you should, in my opinion.
Yeah, good points all around. And I mean, I think the thing there is that with the knots versus core and all this, like erring on not breaking stuff would be a good thing. And as you say, just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be done. And I think the thing here is that there's a lot of stuff on Bitcoin that can be done as is permitted with the current protocols, but it doesn't mean we need to change the incentives to just open the door wide open. And so I think I err on the side of that you have to get the money right or else the tech doesn't matter. You might as well downgrade to earlier versions of core if you want, or earlier versions of knots because they're not broken. They're not breaking the money. The tech doesn't need to constantly improve itself, but...
No, it's that doctor saying, I don't remember the Latin phrase, but first do no harm. That should always be like your top priority. If it ain't broken, don't fix it.
And what goes in hand with that is just because something is sitting in front of you doesn't mean you need to make a adjustment to it. I was given the tip early on in my consulting career whenever I put a thing in front of my partner for review, like that's what they're called, partners, like the high level people for review, is make a small mistake, like one small mistake that they'll catch, and then they can tell you fix this. But then they'll ignore the rest of the thing because they found their one mistake, and then they can move on. So it's just speaking to that people like to find something wrong and fix it so that they feel useful and justify their existence. And I guess the Bitcoin Core developers, like if they didn't have something to tweak, they wouldn't need to get all those fancy grants and all this, right?
Which is why we should stop calling them developers and call them maintainers, which is what they are and what they're supposed to be. So Bitcoin Core maintainers, that would be a more accurate job description.
Well, I'm happy to switch to the Bitcoin Knots maintainers, and I trust them to a certain extent, but plenty of other people appear to have been verifying that Knots doesn't have anything wrong with it at all, other than apparently an association with a certain other Luke. But anyway, back a little more onto the topic here, though. The point about looking at how your behavior can be to those at the bottom of the pyramid, I like that a lot, because the thing here is that the Cantillon effect in inflation really affects those at the bottom the most. And as much as the world has been pulling people out of poverty to an immense degree over the last 50, 30, 20, even 10 years, it's still the people at the bottom rungs of societies that are affected the most by insane policies like this. And one example, the one I keep harping on myself just because I think it's so idiotic, is that the government of Finland keeps raising the VAT rate, the value added tax, the equivalent to sales tax for you Americans. And it's just so insane, because people at the bottom rung spend all of their money, like literally all of it, on stuff. And raising a consumption tax that makes all of their stuff more expensive just hurts them. It's people who have a little bit of money at the end of the month don't care as much if something is a couple of % more expensive. But it's the people who can't afford, who literally don't have any money at the end of the month. They have to buy worse stuff. They have to buy less stuff. And it's just an example of how policies like this are disproportionate. And as much as I think it's the right thing to do to be selfish, it's also the right thing to do to say, hey, maybe let's get rid of the things that are worse for the people at the bottom of the pyramid first, because they're the ones who are going to be more freed more quickly. And it's unfortunate. I do not think that everyone at the bottom of the economic pyramid is there because they deserve it. That's not true.
Most of them are because of political interventionism, I'll say. And the people who have the most to gain from a more free society are the people on the bottom of the pyramid. And this is what socialists never understand. If you relieve Elon Musk of more tax burden, the people at the bottom will gain the most from that, not Elon himself, because he already has like everything he could wish for. The thing is, what happens when you remove the theft, especially the inflation, is that all prices drop, and that benefits the poorest the most. So that's the beauty of Ancapistan, and I sure hope we'll head more and more into that direction. And I think we are, because we're Bitcoiners.
I think that's a great way to wrap up. Yeah, I think that will do it for us. Any last words, Knut?
Yeah, a thing that Max Hillebrand said to us on the pod once came to mind. Like, we asked him, I don't know if you remember this, but we asked him if there's one life advice that you could give, what would it be? And he thought for a while and then simply answered, don't steal. And how hard that is to live by, because every time you use fiat currency, you steal from your children and their peers. But don't steal is a very, very good motto to live by. And I'd like to end on that.
Sounds great. With that, this has been the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. Thanks for listening.